Hello, it's the Urban Lady Prepper, and this is my podcast. Welcome. I help single moms and single women be more prepared for whatever Mother Nature and life may throw at them. My podcasts are an expansion of the topics I covered for the week in my blog at urbanladyprepper.com. Stop by for a peek, leave a comment or question, and maybe you'll get a mention on one of the upcoming shows. Thank you. Hi, I'm Lynn Jordan, and this is my podcast, Urban Lady Prepper, Preparedness for Single Moms and Single Women. Why this podcast? Well, most prepper podcasts and YouTube videos are single dudes or family men. Single moms and single females, which I've abbreviated to SimSifs, are not explicitly addressed. There are plenty of lady homesteaders, but they tend to be married with families. Many YouTubers and podcast prepper homesteaders live in rural or far suburban areas. Too few focus on prepping in actual urban locations where many SimSifs live. This podcast and its accompanying blog at urbanladyprepper.com aim to assist SimSifs in emergency preparedness. You can find the time, you can't find the funds, and you can't find the space even in the smallest apartment. With grit and grace, I want you to confidently navigate the difficult times ahead. The future is becoming more and more uncertain. Let me help you be more prepared. Before we begin, I will let you know that as you venture into the prepping world, you'll find many videos, reels, and blogs on preparedness that may contain controversial opinions, religious and political slants, conspiracy theories, and gatekeeping. I want to be clear, I don't care what you are, who you are, where you're from, where you are now, or what religion you follow. All are welcome here. I may mention a theory or another website that says or presents things you may disagree with or find extreme, but the intent is to provide a different point of view. The website or prepper personality may be more knowledgeable or skilled in the area of prepping I'm presenting at that time. They can provide you with some ideas, recipes, or an experience that can give you perspective to see how others may handle a situation. So if you encounter a prepper whose YouTube content or clips say things that rub you wrong, but they have awesome storage tips, remember, like all advice, take what resonates and leave the rest. Remember, prepping has one common thread, regardless of your background, and that is we want to be ready for any scenario. We want to survive it and ultimately thrive in spite of it. I will not inject politics or religion into my formats outside of the context of prepping, such as war or lesser conflicts that may impact things like the food supply or obtaining important goods like medicine. Incidents like mass shootings will be presented as they are, tragedies that we can hopefully avoid by honing our situational awareness skills, learning self-defense, etc. We all have opinions about such hot-button issues. However, my platforms are intended to help you navigate what dangers those incidents could present to you personally and how to be better prepared for them. Not get on a soapbox and off topic. If you'd like to check my resources and do further reading, I list them in my blog at urbanladyprepper.com. If you stayed with me this far, thank you and welcome. Surely by now, you've heard the term prepping. You might visualize Rambo types or families with compounds, gun arsenals, and tubs of rice in a bunker who run evacuation drills. While those folks exist, and more power to them, you may not realize that being prepared doesn't have to be that expansive, expensive, or extreme. What works for other preppers may not always work for SimSifs living in the city or the close suburbs. Many SimSifs do not have the skill, knowledge, space, or physicality to assist with homesteading projects you may have seen on TikTok or YouTube. While many women have some of these skills and physical strength, many do not. These attributes can be acquired, of course, but right now, I want to reach out to the average city lady who does not have them at this time. It can be overwhelming if you've just dipped your toe into the prepper waters. When you enter a search and one result has the top 100 YouTube prepper channels, that lets you know that there is a lot of information out there. This is not counting other sites that aren't specifically prepper sites, but may focus on homesteading for preparedness and not just as a hobby. It becomes a rabbit hole. You'll start with a prepping video that may lead you to a search on the various doomsday scenarios, which may lead you to a self-defense video, which may lead you to a homestead video, which may lead you to a gardening video, which may lead you to a container garden video, you get the idea. then some of the information may contradict each other. It's enough to make you not want to get involved. Many lady preparedness gurus focus primarily on food security, which is extremely important, but all the gardening, canning, and preserving is a lot to absorb and may be too much to attempt at first if doable at all at this time for you. While learning these things is fantastic and eventually should be added to your skill set, even the most basic food preservation costs something, and budgets and schedules are tight. The information may be plentiful and free, but the supplies and materials are not. Advice on basic emergency preparedness and bugging out or in aren't emphasized with these ladies, or it's taken for granted that you're past that point in your preparedness journey. If you're listening to this podcast, I will assume that you're starting from scratch and each of you has your reason for tuning in. Have you recently been touched by a natural disaster? Has the prospect of another pandemic made you wonder if we'll have a repeat of a 2020 in the near future? Are you concerned with the random food and over-the-counter medication shortages? That conflicts between nations may cause more shortages and increase prices for our basic needs. Your reason for listening may be none or all of those things, but all of them are valid, and I applaud you for wanting to be more proactive. You may say to yourself, I'm not prepared for anything. But if you have an emergency plan worked out with your kids, secured a safe place to go and how to get there in case you have to evacuate, enough food for at least 2 weeks, a first aid kit, a case of water sitting somewhere, and at least one flashlight that's working and doesn't have battery acid oozing, you're already on your way. It doesn't take a lot to have the basics. If you have at least those things, you can kick it up a notch without hurting your pocket. If you don't have the above, that's where you can start. If you have to ask, why should you be prepping, you either must not have dealt with a natural disaster that left you without power or water for weeks, or you still feel that the powers that be will take care of you when something like that happens. If you're the former, consider yourself extremely lucky. But you must have been aware of Hurricane Katrina, Superstorm Sandy, and the episodes of civil unrest from Portland to Charlottesville. Have you thought about what you would have done if you lived in those areas? What actions did you take if you considered being more prepared for such scenarios? Or did you tell yourself, I don't have the time or money, or that won't happen here? If you're the latter, the disasters mentioned above of Katrina and Sandy should remind you that the powers that be were not so powerful. Stranded families, looting, power outages that lasted for months, gas lines, people fighting over whatever resources were left. It wasn't pretty, and many areas still haven't fully recovered. With all due respect to your situation and point of view, please understand this. Things are not improving. The weather is getting more extreme, and places that never had to worry about tornadoes, flooding, and earthquakes now have them. Those areas where these disasters occur now have them more frequently. The weather patterns are changing, the sea levels are rising, and the planet is getting hotter, affecting everything, especially our food supply. Regardless of why you believe these things are happening, you cannot deny them. If you do, you're endangering yourself and your family. Please don't let stubbornness or complacency blind you to what is occurring and how it can affect your life and choices. When I have cursory conversations with people regarding prepping, they'll often say something along the lines of, "Oh, I can't do that," or "Stuff like that won't happen here." What I'm really hearing is that they hope they won't get caught out there with no food or water or need to evacuate. They hope that events like these won't happen where they are. I've never understood those people who believe that a tragic event won't happen to them or in their town and are devastated when it does. The belief that bad things happen elsewhere to other people is dangerous thinking that prevents you from being ready should something bad occur. I used to get annoyed when a victim said, "Why did this happen to me?" My knee-jerk response was, "Oh, you're too good to suffer? So it would be okay if it happened to someone else?" To think that you are, for whatever reason, above tragedy is foolish. I believe that sticking your head in the sand and not having at least the basics on hand and a plan to evacuate in an emergency, especially if you're directly responsible for others, isn't just poor planning, it's negligence. That said, here are some cursory questions you can ask yourself as you begin your preparedness journey. With tornadoes, you may have minutes to shelter in place or get out. Can you do it either efficiently or safely in that short amount of time? An evacuation, do you know where to go? Do you have transportation? Will you have to go to a shelter? What about your pets? Our personal security is more at risk than ever, and it can appear that people are losing their minds. Regardless of your politics, mass shootings are happening way too often. People are no longer safe going to school, shopping, or church. It's hard to keep calm and carry on when the basic things we used to do without drama are becoming riskier. How are you adapting and decreasing the risk for you and your family? Some peaceful protests can turn violent. Some marches are meant to inflame or incite, and it can turn deadly. These tend to happen in an urban environment. What will you do if this happens? How will you keep your family safe if such an event happens in your area? Random attacks are becoming more frequent, and a divided nation fighting homelessness, inflation, cost of living increases, disease, and unpredictable employment. How do you address not living in fear but being vigilant as you and your kids go about your day-to-day life? Speaking frankly, when it comes to mass shootings, civil unrest, and random attacks, there isn't much you could do. Sometimes you're just in the right place at the wrong time and can be caught in the middle or become a victim of something. What you can do is be more aware of your surroundings and pay attention to trends such as knife attacks, an uptick in assaults, and crime waves if they're occurring in your area. Sign up for local news alerts and add your town, city, and county to your news and social media feeds. This way, if something pops off, you'll know and be able to make the adjustments needed to avoid it. It may be as simple as a closed road due to an accident, or more serious as a shooting in an area you drive through on your way home. Also, if you plan on visiting an area for a day trip you don't visit often, check the local news and headlines. You want to ensure an event that may have a large gathering of people isn't scheduled, or, if that's where you're going, that some group isn't expected to try and disrupt it. Stay alert for any fights, unexpected roadblocks, or closures that may affect not just your drive and parking, but your safety. Food insecurity is worsening around the globe. I'm sure you already know what has become what I call rolling blackouts regarding food. It's more common than ever to see items on shelves completely gone, or episodes where something that used to be readily available is out of stock, or limitations are placed on how many you can buy. You may be less aware of foods that you would assume we made plenty of come from countries where civil unrest and war are concerns. For example, the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. Were you aware that some of Ukraine's top exports to us are animal and vegetable oils, fruit, nut foods, vegetables, and grains? Some of Russia's top exports are fertilizers, aluminum, and grain. That situation has affected the availability and cost of these items, so we should be concerned about whether or not it's worth having a little extra on hand in case they become scarce or prices further increase. Also, extreme weather and supply chain problems have significantly impacted food production and supply. The cost for farmers and ranchers to run their operations is causing them to make choices that will trickle down to you in the form of higher prices or unavailability. How are you prepared for this? Again, regardless of why you believe the Earth's temperature is increasing, it is. Were you aware that many ranchers sold, killed, or allowed cattle to die in 2022 and 2023 due to heat and drought? That the cattle population is at an all-time low. That is why meat is so expensive and available in fewer quantities and cuts. You may say, I realize these things are happening, but I live in a small apartment with 2 kids. I work hard, I have 2 jobs, I don't have a partner or a husband, and my kid's father is not in the picture or helpful. I don't know how I can do this. I get it. I grew up middle class in an apartment with my mom, grandmother, and 2 uncles. My parents were separated, and my mom worked 2 jobs. We weren't rich, but together we made it work. Living in an apartment building, I learned one thing very early. Anytime there was work done in the basement, the management would turn the water off. You might get the notification the day before. Sometimes you did not get a notice. In the morning, there was no worse feeling than turning on the faucet and nothing came out, or some brownish gurgling stuff trickled out that you didn't want to touch. For this reason, anytime we emptied a 2-liter soda bottle, my family had a hardcore cola habit back then, so we had plenty. We would clean it and fill it with water. We would put these bottles on the fridge and under the sink, stopping when we ran out of room for their designated spots. We were never caught without water. To this day, I always have water stored. When the water was turned off in the apartment, it was usually restored by the evening. But consider that as clean water becomes more scarce, there may be a time when you turn on your faucet and nothing drinkable comes out, if anything comes out at all. Do you have any water stored for basic things like cooking, bathing, or drinking? If you think being without potable water is an unlikely scenario, think of Flint, Michigan, or the current situation in Jackson, Mississippi. Living in an apartment building taught me something else, how wasteful people can be with energy. In our apartment, lights were on in every room, and the heat or AC was always cranked high. Energy conservation was discussed in schools and broadcast on PSAs during afternoon cartoons. I became more conscious of the energy I and others in my family were wasting. I began turning the lights off and turning the heat and AC down. My family expressed their annoyance, but they began to understand that just as we knew what it was like to be without water, we had to be more thoughtful about energy. Should energy become rationed, would you be able to adjust? These things were helpful to me when I became a widow in 2011 and on my own and began prepping before it was a thing. When my first husband died in 2011, we had been married for nearly 19 years. He, a boomer, was not quite ready for me. I was a typical Gen Xer, sarcastic, nihilistic, independent, and already jaded before I hit 20 years old. He was 11 years older than me, and I represented the fire and passion of his youth. He brought calm, stability, and insight that made me a much better person for having been his wife. He was an Army vet, a former black belt, and a MacGyver type who could generate electricity with 2 peanuts, a bow tie, and a flashlight. Okay, maybe that was an exaggeration, but it seemed he would make it happen if you needed something or needed something done. He could do it correctly, or, if it was an emergency, jerry-rig it to get it to go in a pinch. He always had a knife in his belt, a mini flashlight, a pen, a handkerchief, and the extra key. He could fix anything, and he was a computer tech. When my computer gave me the blue screen of death, his first question was, "Did you save the last thing you worked on?" Of course, the answer was no. He would shrug, let me pout, and fix it. He was a kind but stoic man who felt and cared deeply. He taught me persistence, to look before I leapt, and always do the right thing with the right attitude and intention. How does this relate to my prepping story? As I mentioned, he always had the things you needed you didn't think to have on you. I never had a pen, an extra key, or carried a knife. Now I do. I used to be edgy and confrontational. He taught me not only could that be dangerous for me since I did not know self-defense or carried a weapon at that time, but it generally didn't bring me the results I wanted. So I try to listen more than I speak, still working on that, and practice self-control so I'm not so easily triggered and enter a situation where my mouth writes a check my butt can't cover. In these times when people die in road rage incidents and mouth off and get shot, his belief in self-control had a profound effect on me. After his death, I knew I needed to move. I could no longer afford to stay in New York, and at 42, a house full of stuff and 2 dogs with a total weight of nearly 200 pounds, moving in with my mom and stepdad was not something I thought would work. I felt I was inflicting too much on them when they should enjoy their golden years. So, I packed up my life and moved to Georgia. My dad, who moved to Atlanta in the 70s, was an incredible support system and lived 15 minutes away. After living with my family until I was 19, meeting and marrying my husband and moving in with him, this move was a huge adjustment for me. This was the first time that I had my own place and lived alone. Water was still my first significant prep. Believe it or not, New York tap water is renowned for its quality and taste. Georgia, on the other hand, where you would think the water would be pure and fresh, is disgusting. And drinking it out of the tap, I was told, can make you sick. It smelled so bad I didn't have to be told twice. I bought an extra filtered water pitcher as a pot filler and for the dog's water. Also around this time, I started hearing about how clean water is a finite resource, and with the aquifers being drained, climate change, and polluted fresh water, this would be a huge problem into the future. This may be the first time you've heard about this. There's a lot of information regarding the decreasing availability of fresh water if you'd like to check into it further. I was first made aware of it due to a documentary I watched, and I then followed up with more research to confirm how bad it's getting. We're draining our aquifers at too rapid of a clip, and lack of rain or average rainfall negated by excessive heat is making drought a problem. There's no easy solution other than restrictions, requests we cut back, or, as a prepper, store water, and collect as much rainfall as possible. Remember that it takes something as big as a drought or hurricane or smaller inconvenience such as a water main break to leave you without fresh water unless you have some stored. If you're still unsure about how widespread drought is in the U.S., here are some statistics for you. According to drought.gov, in the U.S. at the close of April 2024, over 15% of the U.S. and 18% of the lower 48 states are in drought, 126 million acres of major crops are experiencing drought, and over 20 million people in the U.S. are affected by it. Expand your thinking and recognize that this is a much bigger thing than not being able to water your lawn when you want. The lack of fresh water and adequate rainfall affects every aspect of your life. So I began to store water. I decided that no matter what, my dogs and I would never be without water, and now I had a place to store it. And you should be storing water too. Did you know that you could live longer without food than water? While food is necessary, water is needed to drink, for you and your pets, and for cooking, rinsing, and washing. If you have limited storage space, consider dividing that space to accommodate water storage. You can get water in packets that take up less space than bottles, are less cumbersome to carry, and are convenient when traveling. You can also utilize dead space, such as on top of the refrigerator and under your sink, to store liters of water. Thank you for listening. Join me on the next episode where I discuss Prepping 101 for single moms, single females, what I call SimSifs, and answer your biggest question: where do I start? Well, folks, that's the end of this week's podcast. I hope that I've given you some things to think about as you go through the upcoming week. I post a new blog every Wednesday and Friday, with a new podcast uploaded every Sunday morning. If you want to know the sources I've used, there will be a blog entry with that information and the opportunity to post your comments and questions. I look forward to hearing from you. Ladies, stay safe, stay sharp, and be ready.